Hey everybody, welcome in, welcome in. Excited to cook with you today. My name is Chef Alex, here joined with you by Samantha and the moderators, the chat. Hey there.
Hello. It's nice to cook with you this chilly morning. I'm excited to have some deliciousness.
Me too. I've been looking forward to this one for a very, very long time. As a lot of you know, I'm very into South American cuisine. Spent a lot of time cooking that, not only in the home I grew up in, but also with my own business. And arepas are, to me, what I'm obsessed about. So I can't wait to share this crispy mushroom arepa with you. We're joined here by our friends at P.A.N Cornmeal. They're makers of this amazing harina pan, which is masa flour that you can use for the arepas that we're making today, along with an assortment of all kinds of products. We're talking empanadas, tamales. You could even use this for even like a breading flour. And then they have a number of other products as well. Flours you can use for all kinds of other products, whether it's a cornbread, different varieties of arepas. P.A.N is here to help you, and they also have all kinds of recipes that you can find on P.A.N's website. And I'm really just attached to this product because I'm Colombian, and for me, arepas are our bread. This is what we eat every single day along with folks from Venezuela. 3 out of 4 Venezuelans and Colombians start their day every single day with arepas. What's awesome about them is that they're gluten-free, they're amazingly satisfying, so they got the nice kind of crisp, almost like a nice crust on the outside. And if you cook them right, it's kind of like this soft consistency, and you can either top them or fill them with all kinds of things. They're really like a blank canvas. And so today, we're gonna start with making some of our masa, and that's basically the dough for our arepas. And we'll mix those ingredients. We'll let that rest for a little while, and then meanwhile, we will then prep everything for the crispy mushrooms, chop that up, basically create like a little marinade before they go into the hot oven. And then we'll continue with making our arepas and finish stuffing them. So without further ado, let's get to making some arepas. And so here, this is the white corn flour from Harina P.A.N. Harina P.A.N is kind of a cool company, and it's a very neat origin story because this product actually came from actually brewery, and they were trying to figure out what to do with the excess corn that they had from their brewing process. And so they created this arepa flour to basically eliminate some of the hard work of making corn flour masa from scratch. It's a true labor of love. It's kind of like a dying art form in a lot of ways, making it from scratch, just because of how much work it is. When I make arepas, it's typically like a whole day process making it from corn from scratch. So Harina P.A.N really makes it just incredibly accessible. And so back to the origin story, this started in the 60s in Venezuela. And P.A.N basically stood for, it's like a alimenticio nutricional. And so it's basically like a nutritional staple that became the bread for the country and for much of the continent. And now many, many people, as we're more familiar with South American cuisine, we can find them on grocery stores all over the place across the country. And with P.A.N, we can find it in places like Walmart and Kroger. And so what I'm doing is I'm pouring in water here that's mixed with salt. And so I allow the salt, heaping teaspoon, to dissolve into the water. And if you're asking the ratio, we always start with 1 to 1. So I've got 2 cups of harina P.A.N here, and I'm gonna start by adding about 2 cups of water, and then I may add more if needed. So I've got 2.5 cups in here, but I'm gonna start by adding about 2 cups, see what that looks like before I finish adding the rest of the water. And so the reason I dissolve the salt in the water, you could just dump the salt regularly into this masa as you're mixing it, but then what you don't get is the even distribution. So by letting the salt dissolve into that water, we're just kind of ensuring more of an even distribution. And we want this to really have almost kind of like a Play-Doh-like consistency. We don't want any dry bits. And so I'm taking my hands, my fingers, and making them pretty stiff and using them almost like a whisk to move the masa, squeeze it. And this is kind of like a really fun thing to do with kids, but I feel like it kind of brings out the inner kid in all of us playing with dough like this. There's just something like that's very like cathartic about playing with masa like this. The feeling is just really, really fun. But again, we're looking for that kind of consistency where it's not cracking or breaking, but we're getting this really, if you were to put a big fist into it, you're getting the impression it's not really cracking around the edges. So that's how we know we have enough moisture content from the water. And then this is when we'll also add just a little bit of oil, or you could also add butter. Melted butter is another common addition for the oil. And this is gonna help bind the arepa and really give it that truly, truly, truly masa consistency where all of the fat and the water is kind of dissolved to form a really, really smooth dough. And I'm forming this into balls. And so these balls are about probably 2.5 inches in diameter, but it's kind of up to you how big you want to make them, right? So this is kind of like the standard size that I go for a stuffed arepa. Some people like them a little bit thicker, bigger. You can go ahead and increase the size of these balls if you want them kind of thin and crispy, smaller in size. And then once we have them all formed into balls, we're then gonna go into actually flattening them. And I think of these, just a lot of childhood memories come up. I've talked about my grandma, what it meant to really be inspired by her cooking and someone who viewed food as medicine. But I think a lot about just a lot of folks who come from other countries and how important it is to get that little taste of home, and also what it feels like to not see yourself represented in the day-to-day, to not see yourself necessarily if you grew up in a place where, or you're living in a place here in the States where there's not a lot of food from your country of origin. It can feel really challenging and isolating. And so for us, harina pan was the way that we were able to eat arepas in the day-to-day. And it was one of the only things that we really ate regularly that was Colombian or Venezuelan. So it was a really important taste of home. And we started every day with an arepa and a little fried egg. Oftentimes we do it with dinner too, and have it kind of as a side with some amazing braised meat or something. And basically what I'm doing is I'm taking these balls and I'm just lightly patting them back and forth. And we're looking for probably about 4 inches in diameter, so something like that. And then you can see I'm pushing against the sides to make sure that I don't have any cracking. We don't want the cracks on the sides because that's what's gonna kind of hold the arepa together, because we're gonna stuff this. We're gonna cut it open, and then we're gonna add the mushrooms. And so you wanna start these off by getting them nice and crispy in the pan, then we'll finish them in the oven. We've got the oven warming to 425, so if you're not already doing that, you can go ahead and get that started, and then also lightly oil a sheet pan for the mushrooms. I feel like arepas are accessible. It's a good first recipe for folks who maybe aren't as experienced, aren't as confident in the kitchen. Arepas are kind of a good introductory to get your hands a little dirty and figure out, like, you know what? You can eat amazing food without a lot of effort necessarily.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are some things that the cornmeal could also be used to make besides arepas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think besides arepas, one of my favorite things to do, we would often use the yellow harina pan to make empanadas, and that was kind of like a special occasion thing, fried Colombian empanadas. Another one is I like using it recently. Instead of regular flour, we'll use harina pan or masa flour for dredging maybe some fish and then frying it up in a pan. That's really nice. And then we just finished the holidays not too long ago, so tamales and Venezuelan hallacas, which are like a version of tamales. Those are kind of my favorite things to do. But I'm curious, at home, what are some other things that come to mind with masa, with other kinds of arepas that people have cooked at home? Tell me in the chat. We'd love to see. So here we have these arepas are now ready to go in the pan. We'll just go with a non-stick pan, a little bit of neutral oil, just enough to kind of coat the bottom. Not a lot, so it's maybe about a teaspoon max. We'll add a little bit more, but we're really trying to sear these, not fry them. And so it looks like our pan is just getting hot here. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop our arepas in and make sure that the edges are not cracking. We also wanna make sure that, you see I'm kind of pressing them down. This is just to make sure that we have a uniform flatness on each side so that it cooks evenly. We're gonna go ahead and drop this in. Got this at a pretty high heat to start, at max just to start, get it sizzling. Then we'll turn it down a little bit just so that we don't burn them or anything. But we'll start it off pretty high. And now we'll get going with our shiitakes.
Have you ever gotten one of those like mushroom growing kits?
I've done that once. There's some local growers at the farmer's market. We did oyster mushrooms, and it was amazing. I thought it was going to be like a one-time thing, and the thing just kept on giving.
Yeah, we actually have an oyster mushroom block right now, which is so funny because we have it in our bathroom. It needs to be like moist in the air.
Yeah.
And for anybody who has never watched a mushroom grow, mushrooms grow differently than normal plants, so they like can double in size every day. It's incredible.
I love that. It's one of the coolest living science experiments that you could implement into your home.
Somebody was asking if the resting is necessary. That's in the recipe, or no.
Glad somebody asked. I was just going to answer that. So for the sake of cooking for you guys and the sake of time, I didn't rest, but I think that is an important step just to really kind of make sure that all of the ingredients are fully solidified. It's not an absolute requirement, but it is going to help in terms of the consistency of the masa and making sure that it's at the right hydration level, right? So maybe it seemed like it was at the right hydration level when you first made it, but then after that 10 minutes, you realize you have to add a little bit more. And that's partly kind of what that's for, is just to make sure that the moisture level is where you want it to be.
And I was going to ask, you're so knowledgeable. I'm just taking the opportunity to ask all the questions I have. What's the difference between like an arepa and a pupusa?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. A lot of the difference between these different, I'll call them masa shapes, like a gordita is another masa shape that's very similar to an arepa, and it's just a slightly smaller version, and they stuff them with things. What's the difference between a gordita and an arepa? Really not a lot, and it's just really just a name for the most part. There's a lot of different varieties of corn that are used for specific flours, right? So the corn that's used for arepa harina, for arepa flour, is a little bit different than some of the corn that's used for certain tortillas or other masas. So that's kind of one of the biggest differences. And harina P.A.N has kind of like their special way of boiling the corn and processing it to make it turn it into a dough and bind, but it also makes it more nutritious. By pre-cooking the corn, it makes it easier to digest. And this is all kind of like from an ancient technique with masa that came from Mexico. And so this was basically nixtamal. That's the process of cooking corn with lime. You've heard me talk a little bit about this in other lessons maybe if you've listened in. And it's a chance to preserve corn, help it last longer by cooking it first and then grinding it and turning it into a flour, like for this. And that's kind of like the basis for all kinds of delicious masa products. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to marinate these mushrooms really quick. I'm just going to get them into a bowl here, and we're going to get these ingredients for the marinades. So we got some Worcestershire, we have some lemon juice, we've got some garlic, finely minced. Then we're going to mix that up with the mushrooms here. We've got some salt.
I just love Worcestershire sauce. I feel like it's such a flavor bomb. So such like a shortcut to all of a sudden it's this super flavorful thing. I love it.
It's
Big
really
fan.
good. We're going to get a little bit of this oil on here to coat the mushrooms as well. Continue coating those in our seasoning mix. Make sure that garlic is evenly across everything and all these mushrooms coated with the oil as well. Looks like that's pretty evenly distributed, and these guys are looking like they're getting there. I'm just kind of pressing them down just a little bit to get them to kind of continue cooking evenly. But in the meantime, I can get this sheet pan ready to go. And this pan is very, very hot, so be careful as you're touching it, but you can hear this sizzle. That's what we want. Immediately as we put them in, we want to hear that. We want to give it a good shake. Careful not to touch the hot pan, but we're just spreading these evenly so that they start to kind of crisp up. Those are gonna go back in the oven for about 25 minutes. Here we go. They're continuing to sizzle. And then what we'll do is we'll check on our arepas. And so this is about kind of like the max level of charring, blackening that you want to see on the arepa. For the most part, it's a little bit more of that like kind of coffee brown, and then it's starting to blacken. But we don't want the entire thing like totally blackened. This is, I would say, like almost kind of a perfectly cooked arepa. This one needs a little bit more on that side. We're gonna also kind of continue toasting it up in the oven in just a second here. I'll get it into the oven. So that's gonna kind of cook the inside. But these, I would say, are less than an inch thick. An inch would be a very thick arepa. I would say more between like a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch is where I'd push it with that. And then.
But it sounds like you want something to get crispy on the outside so you get that textural contrast.
Yeah. So deep frying is a good way to do that because you do get that crispy crust. But deep frying is kind of a pain always with at home, especially like what do you do with all that oil? I feel like it's a big one. So nice to be able to do it in the pan. And so these are just there with the color. We're gonna continue finishing them in the oven. And so let's go ahead and drop these in. And so yeah, we've got this cheese that's pre-shredded. And we are now gonna kind of go into slicing up this avocado. Same thing as how cheese is like a really classic topping for arepas. I feel like avocado is also equally classic. You're gonna see that on so many different kinds of arepas, including my favorite kind. I mentioned that I'm Colombian in origin. My stepdad is Venezuelan. My favorite arepa would probably have to be reina pepiada. Curious if anyone's tried reina pepiada. Any other favorite arepa fillings? And I'm just kind of removing this avocado. Didn't do the greatest job with that last slice there, but that's okay.
And somebody was asking if P.A.N yellow cornmeal can be used for arepas.
Absolutely. P.A.N yellow cornmeal is an awesome option. For some different kinds of arepas, it's more about preference between the two, right? For certain recipes, they might call for a specific color. Certain things like empanadas, typically the empanadas that I grew up making, we always use the yellow cornmeal for that. I'm just checking on these arepas here. And they're looking like they are continuing to crisp up, and they have a nice, if I push it down, I can see there's this kind of outer casing almost. That's what we want. So these arepas are done. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to remove these mushrooms as well. And this is when we add that cubed up butter, the 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of butter to continue crisping them up a little bit.
Man, I can tell you're a chef because I feel like every chef I know has like Teflon like hands that just don't feel heat.
Yeah.
I'm just watching you pull those out of the oven.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't always so kind to my hands in my early stages as a cook, but I'm learning to be kinder and just lean into having Teflon hands. We just want to give these a good coat in the butter before we slide them back in. This is just going to help them crisp up just a little bit. You can see they're already starting to brown a bit. And so these go back into the oven. A couple minutes here. And then these arepas, ideally you want to let them cool just a little bit longer. But that being said, again, kind of like I did with the resting of the masa, because I have all you lovely people here with me today, we're just going to go ahead and cut straight into it without a whole lot of cooling. Hopefully we've got enough cooking, and it looks like they're doing their thing. They're holding together, which is good.
It looks so good, but it's kind of funny. From here, it almost looks like an English muffin.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of how I treat them in the morning every day. Like anything you would put on an English muffin, promise you it's good on an arepa. And you can see it's really soft in the middle. It's definitely still very, very soft. These could have even gone just a little bit longer cooking on all sides, really but I feel like they were good with the initial sear for the most part. Again, this is that perfect sear. If it's looking like that on every side, you're perfect. And they could go in the oven just for a couple more minutes longer, but this is just cooked enough. This is just to that spot where we want it. So we're gonna go first with the avocado here. If there's a thicker side, you can kind of use that as the base. Avocado. Perfect, and then we'll get some of the mushrooms on top. All right. These are looking nice. They're just starting to brown, and I would have left them in there for just another couple minutes longer to continue to let them brown as they have the butter there. But they're starting to crisp up, which is great. So they're just to that point where we want them at home. Feel free to cook them just a little bit longer to continue crisping them up to your desired crispiness, right? Ooh, and this is starting to smell good. Just the mix of that butter smell with the mushrooms, that umami goodness. This is starting to do good things. And then what would I serve these with? If you have a favorite hot sauce, that's a great option. I think that an aioli, spicy aioli is a nice one. I love doing a Colombian ají, which is almost like a little spicier version of a chimichurri. That's a really fun one. And again, hey, these are blank canvas, so there's no rules. Think about what some of your favorite sauces are at home and ways to customize it. We're throwing on just kind of a little pinch of this shredded cheese here.
Oh, it looks so good. Somebody was asking about what the texture is inside, saying, you know, with an English muffin, you open them with a fork to get the craggly inside, but is the texture of the arepa more smooth?
Yeah, it's almost, it's hard because it's a little bit smooth, but there's going to be moments when it's not like a fully even, smooth slice because the masa is sticky. So as the masa, it's like a mix between smooth and sticky, if that makes any sense. That's the best way I would describe it. And it's definitely got a fair amount of give. If you push down into it, it's soft, it's squishy. What do you think? Should we give it a bite and see how I did?
It looks very delicious. All of you in the chat are lucky that I'm not just climbing over the table, abandoning you in the chat, trying to eat my own.
That is fun. That reminds me of flavors I grew up with. This is the kind of thing we would have eaten. Maybe not with Oaxacan cheese, but it takes me back to my abuela's cooking. Super fun, easy one for cooks of any level. That's the really fun thing about this one. Thanks so much for joining everyone today. And you can find more recipes at P.A.N. US on social media. And you can also follow us at Homemade is Live. And we want to go ahead and plug the next recipe with Harina P.A.N., which is a corn and basil gnocchi. That's going to be on March 18th. Thanks so much for joining, everybody. Appreciate it.